Identity is a word that most people meet early in life. It is the way a person or a group says who they are. In everyday talk, a child might point to a red ball and say, "Oh, that is my ball." The word "mum" tells the child that the ball belongs to them, that it is part of their identity as a child who owns a red ball. When adults talk about identity, they often mean a deeper sense of self. It can be the feeling of being a student, a parent, a musician, or a citizen of a certain country. In philosophy, the question of what identity really is has been asked for thousands of years. The answer is not simple, but the basic idea is that identity is what makes something or someone the same over time, even while other things change. The first step is to separate personal identity from social identity. Personal identity is the story each person tells about themselves. It includes memories, thoughts, feelings, and choices that feel private. Social identity is the set of roles, groups, and labels that a person carries in the world. A person may say, "Well, I am a teacher," and that part of identity comes from a job, a school, a set of expectations, and a community of other teachers. The two kinds of identity overlap, but they are not the same. Personal identity lives inside the mind, while social identity lives in the space between people. A simple everyday example can help. Imagine a favorite shirt. The shirt is a piece of cloth, but it has become part of a person's identity because it was worn on a special day, perhaps a graduation. When the person sees the shirt later, the memory of that day comes back, and the shirt feels like a symbol of who they were at that moment. The shirt is not the person, but it helps the person say, "Well, I am someone who values that achievement." Another example is a family role, such as being the older sibling. The role comes with expectations. Helping younger brothers and sisters, setting an example, maybe taking care of chores. When the person thinks of themselves as the older sibling, that label shapes how they act and how others treat them. The role is a social identity that links the person to a family network. Philosophers have tried to explain why identity can feel stable, like a river that always flows in the same channel, and why it can feel fluid, like water that can change its shape. One classic argument for stability comes from the ancient Greek thinker Plato. In the dialogue Phaedo, Plato writes that the soul is the same across many lives. He says that the soul is same because it does not change its essential nature. In simple terms, Plato thought that there is a core part of a person that stays the same, no matter what the body does. This view suggests that identity is like a fixed stone at the bottom of a river. The water may rush past, but the stone does not move. A second argument for stability comes from the early modern philosopher René Descartes. He famously said, "Well, I think, therefore I am." The quote, taken from Meditations on First Philosophy, tells us that the act of thinking proves that there is a thinking self that exists. Descartes believed that the thinking self is the one thing that cannot be doubted. In this view, the self is a stable point that remains even when everything else is uncertain. The idea is that as long as a person can think, they can be sure that there is a why that is doing the thinking. Both Plato and Descartes give reasons to think of identity as something that does not change. Yet there are strong counterarguments that push in the opposite direction. The first counterargument comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who claimed that you cannot step into the same river twice. He meant that everything is constantly changing, including the self. If a river's water is always moving, then the river is never exactly the same. Applied to a person, this means that thoughts, feelings, and experiences are always shifting, so the self cannot stay the same. Heraclitus' view suggests that identity is fluid, like a cloud that reshapes itself with every breeze. A second counterargument for fluidity is offered by the modern thinker David Hume. In his treatise of human nature, Hume argues that when we look inside ourselves, we do not find a single, unchanging self. Instead, we find a bundle of perceptions that appear and disappear. He writes that the self is nothing but a bundle of different perceptions. If the self is just a collection of fleeting thoughts and sensations, then identity cannot be a fixed stone. It is more like a series of snapshots that change from moment to moment. These four positions, two for stability and two for fluidity, show that the debate is alive and well. The arguments are simple enough to follow, yet they open a wide field of thought. They also lead to real-world applications. When a person believes that identity is stable, they may feel more confident about long-term goals. A student who sees herself as a diligent learner can keep that label even when grades dip, because the label is tied to a deep sense of self. In contrast, a person who sees identity as fluid may be more open to change. An employee who thinks of his role as flexible problem solver can shift into a new career without feeling lost, because the label is not tied to a fixed core. Modern interpretations often blend the two views. Some psychologists talk about core self and a self concept. The core self is the part that feels stable, like a favorite shirt that always feels comfortable. The self-concept is the set of roles and beliefs that can be updated, like swapping one shirt for another when the season changes. In everyday language, people might say, "I have always been a curious person, but lately I am also more patient." The sentence shows a stable trait, curiosity, combined with a fluid trait, patience. This mix reflects how many people actually experience identity. Another modern example comes from social media. A teenager may create an online profile that shows a certain style, favorite music, and a set of friends. Over a few months, the teenager may change the profile picture, follow different bands, and write new bios. The online identity appears fluid because it can be edited with a click. Yet the teenager may still feel that there is a core part that never changes, perhaps a love for drawing. The digital world makes the fluid side of identity very visible, while the personal side remains more constant. Analogies help to make these ideas clear. Think of a tree. The trunk of the tree is like the stable part of identity. It holds the tree upright and stays in the same place for many years. The leaves are like the fluid part. They grow, change color, fall, and are replaced. The tree can survive many seasons because the trunk stays, but the appearance of the tree changes with each season. In the same way, a person can keep a core sense of self while constantly changing thoughts, habits, and roles. Historical anecdotes illustrate how identity has been understood in different times. In ancient Greece, the concept of psyche was used to talk about the soul. The playwright Sophocles, in his tragedy Oedipus Rex, writes, "No one knows the truth of his own self." This line shows that even in the 5th century BCE, Greeks were aware that the self could be hard to pin down. The story of Oedipus, who discovers that he has unknowingly fulfilled a terrible prophecy, forces the audience to think about how much of a person's identity is shaped by hidden facts and how much is chosen. A second anecdote comes from the medieval period, when craftsmen formed guilds. A master carpenter in a 14th century guild would wear a special apron and a badge that identified him as a member of that trade. The badge was not just a piece of cloth. It was a sign that the carpenter belonged to a community, followed certain rules, and shared a reputation for quality work. When a carpenter completed an apprenticeship, his identity shifted from apprentice to master. The change was marked by a ceremony and a new badge. This story shows how social identity can be formalized, how it can change, and how it can be tied to a larger group. The ancient Greek idea of the self and the medieval guild identity both point to the fact that identity has always been linked to both personal feeling and social recognition. The Greeks asked, "What is the inner self?" While the guilds asked, what role does a person play in the community? Both questions still matter today. In the present day, the study of identity touches many fields. In law, a person's identity is tied to documents like birth certificates and passports. In medicine, a patient's identity may affect how doctors understand symptoms. In education, teachers talk about a student's identity as a learner. Each of these areas uses identity as a practical tool. The idea that identity can be stable helps institutions keep records and make plans. The idea that identity can be fluid helps them adapt to new information or changes in a person's life. Later sections of the video will explore self-knowledge, the way people come to understand their own minds, and social labels, the words society uses to sort people into groups. Those topics will build on the ideas introduced here. When the viewer reaches the part on self-knowledge, they will see how the stable core self can be examined through reflection. In the social labels section, the fluid side of identity will be shown in how labels can shift over time and across cultures. To bring the discussion back to everyday life, consider two more examples. First, think of a favorite shirt again, but this time imagine that the shirt is given away. The person may feel a small loss, but the feeling of being someone who once owned that shirt stays. The shirt was a symbol, but the symbol can be replaced by another. Second, think of the role of grandparent. When a person becomes a grandparent, a new social identity appears. It brings expectations of storytelling, care, and wisdom. Yet the person's personal identity as a teacher, a musician, or a friend does not disappear. The new role adds a layer, showing how identities can stack. Quotes from primary sources add a human voice to the philosophical discussion. Plato writes in the Republic, "The soul is the same in all its parts, and it is not changed by the body." Descartes, in his Discourse on Method, says, "I am, I exist, that is certain." Heraclitus, as reported by later writers, claims, all things are in flux." Hume, in his Enquiry, notes, "There is no impression of a self, only a succession of perceptions." Each of these lines captures a key point in plain language. When the audience hears these words, they can feel the weight of centuries of thought. The ancient ideas still echo in modern conversations about identity. A teenager may post, "I am still me," echoing the stable view. A friend may say, "Oh, I'm trying new things. I am not the same as before," echoing the fluid view. Both statements are valid parts of the larger picture. The debate about stability versus fluidity also appears in the field of ethics. If identity is stable, then moral responsibility can be traced back to a person's core character. If identity is fluid, then responsibility may be seen as more situational, depending on the role a person is playing at a given moment. For example, a judge might argue that a criminal is still the same person who committed a crime, even after years of rehabilitation. A therapist might argue that the person has changed enough to deserve a fresh start. These opposing views shape laws, policies, and personal judgments. Another modern illustration is the concept of gender identity. Some people view gender as a stable category tied to biology, while others see it as a fluid spectrum that can shift over a lifetime. The discussion mirrors the older philosophical arguments. When a person says, "I have always felt male," they invoke a stable sense of self. When another says, "I now feel more comfortable identifying as non-binary," they express fluidity. Both perspectives rely on the same ideas about what makes identity stay the same or change. The idea of identity as a story also helps. A person can think of their life as a narrative with chapters. The chapter titled "Childhood" may end, but the story continues. The chapters give structure, but the narrator can edit the story as they grow. This storytelling analogy makes the abstract idea of identity feel concrete. It also shows why the debate matters. If the story is fixed, then the ending is predetermined. If the story can be rewritten, then the ending is open. The ancient thinkers who first asked what the self really is left a trail of ideas that still shape modern thought. In the quiet halls of Plato's academy, students would gather around the old stone benches and listen as the master spoke of a world beyond the senses. He described the self as something that lives apart from the changing world, like a puppet whose strings are pulled by unseen hands. The puppet itself does not move on its own, but the strings guide every motion. In this picture, the strings are the eternal forms, perfect versions of everything, and the puppet is the everyday person who imitates those perfect ideas. Plato summed this view in a short line from the Republic. The soul, when it has seen the forms, will turn away from the shadows of the cave. The shadow world is the world of daily change, while the forms are the steady, unchanging patterns that give meaning to every act. A simple way to feel this idea is to picture a child learning to tie shoes. The child watches the steps, repeats them, and eventually the motion becomes smooth. In Plato's view, the child's smooth motion is a copy of a perfect, timeless pattern of tying a knot. The child does not create the pattern. The child merely follows the shape that already exists in the realm of forms. The child's hands are the strings, the mind that follows the pattern is the puppet, and the perfect knot is the form. When the child finally ties the shoes without looking, the mind has aligned with the perfect shape, even though the world around the child is still noisy and shifting. Aristotle, who taught in the Lyceum a few blocks away, offered a different picture. He rejected the idea of a separate world of perfect copies. Instead, he said that everything is a blend of matter and form. He called the form the essence that makes a thing what it is, and the matter the stuff that fills it. In his own words, soul is the first actuality of a living body. The soul, for Aristotle, is not a ghost that floats above the body, but the inner principle that makes a body alive. The child tying shoes is not copying a perfect knot that lives somewhere else. The child's hand, the rope, and the motion together create the knot. The form of the knot is found in the way the rope is arranged, and the matter is the rope itself. The child's mind helps shape the rope, but the shape does not exist apart from the rope. A third voice comes from the Stoics, who gathered in the Stoa, a covered walkway in Athens, and later in the Roman Senate houses. The Stoics said that the self is a rational spark that follows the order of nature. They taught that the wise person lives in harmony with the natural law that runs through all things. As the Roman Stoic Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." For the Stoics, the self is not a puppet, nor a blend of matter and form, but a rational fire that can be guided by understanding. The fire can burn bright or be smothered, but its nature does not change. When a driver chooses a route, the decision is guided by reason, by the map of the city, and by the driver's desire to reach a destination efficiently. The driver's mind is the rational spark, the road is the natural order, and the car is the matter that carries the spark forward. The driver does not need a perfect form of right route that lives elsewhere. The driver reads the signs, feels the traffic, and makes a choice that fits the present situation while staying true to the rational principle of reaching the goal safely. The ancient debates were not just abstract talks. In the Academy, a famous story tells of a heated argument between Plato's student Speusippus and a younger philosopher named Xenocrates. The dispute centered on whether the soul could survive after death. Speusippus argued that the soul, being attached to the forms, could rise above the body, while Xenocrates claimed that the soul was bound to the living body and could not exist alone. The argument lasted for days, with each side using analogies of rivers and vessels to make their point. The story shows how early philosophers used everyday images to explain deep ideas, and how the question of what the self is could be linked to real concerns about life and death. Later, in the Roman Senate, a group of senators gathered to discuss the virtue of a new law that would limit the power of a wealthy merchant. The Stoic senator Musonius Rufus argued that virtue is not a matter of wealth or rank, but of living according to nature's rational order. He quoted the earlier Stoic Epictetus. "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." The senator's opponent, a pragmatic politician, countered that the law must consider the shifting needs of the city, which change like the tide. He used the example of a farmer who must adjust his planting schedule each year. The debate echoed the ancient clash between the unchanging forms and the ever-changing world, showing that the question of the self-stability versus change was already a live issue in public policy. Plato's view, while elegant, faces criticism. One major counter-argument points out that the forms, being unchanging, seem to ignore the fact that daily life is full of change. A child who learns to tie shoes does not follow a static pattern. The child's hands grow, the rope may be thicker or thinner, and the knot may need to be tightened differently each time. If the form of knot never changes, how can it explain the many ways a knot can be made? Critics argue that Plato's theory makes the self too detached from real experience. They say that a self that lives only in the realm of perfect ideas cannot explain why a person feels pain, joy, or confusion in the moment. Aristotle's blend of matter and form also meets resistance. Some modern thinkers argue that the idea of a first actuality leaves the self vulnerable to being reduced to biology. If the soul is just the activity that makes a body alive, then when the body dies, the soul disappears. This view seems to deny any lasting personal identity. A counter-argument here is that many people feel a sense of continuity that goes beyond the physical body, such as the feeling that their childhood self is still part of who they are today. Critics claim that Aristotle's model does not fully capture this sense of an inner thread that runs through all stages of life. Despite these objections, the ancient ideas still find real-world use. The puppet analogy helps teachers explain how habits shape behavior. When a student practices a skill, the repeated actions become like strings that pull the mind in a certain direction. In therapy, the Stoic notion that judgments cause distress is used in cognitive behavioral approaches. A therapist may ask a client to examine the belief, "I must always be perfect," and show how changing that judgment can ease anxiety. The driver choosing a route illustrates how rational planning can coexist with flexibility, a balance that modern decision-making theory often stresses. Modern psychology, which will be explored in later sections, builds on these ancient foundations. The concept of a self-schema in cognitive psychology echoes Plato's idea of a stable pattern that guides perception. The idea of embodied cognition, which says that the mind is shaped by the body's interactions with the world, reflects Aristotle's matter-form blend. The Stoic practice of negative visualization, where one imagines loss to appreciate what one has, mirrors the Stoic focus on controlling judgments rather than external events. One more story from the Academy shows how the ancient thinkers dealt with the problem of change. The philosopher Xenophon, a student of Socrates, once asked his teacher why the soul would need a separate realm of forms if the world already provides examples of beauty and goodness. Socrates replied with a simple image. Imagine a carpenter who builds many chairs. Each chair looks different, but the carpenter has a picture in his mind of the perfect chair. That picture guides his work. This anecdote illustrates the belief that the mind holds an ideal that shapes everyday actions, a belief that still appears in modern discussions of mental models. A second anecdote comes from a Roman courtroom where the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, then emperor, listened to a case about a soldier who stole food during a famine. Marcus asked, "Is the soldier's action wrong because the law says so, or because it harms the community?" The judge answered that the act harms the community, showing that the Stoic idea of virtue as living in harmony with the common good was applied to legal reasoning. This example shows how the ancient view of the self as a rational participant in a larger order can guide real decisions about right and wrong. Plato's quote from the Phaedo, "The soul is immortal and ever living," still rings in discussions about personal identity after death. Aristotle's claim that the form of a thing is what makes it what it is appears in modern debates about whether a person's identity is tied to their brain, their body, or something else. The Stoic maxim, "What is up to us is our own thoughts," is echoed in modern mindfulness practices that teach people to observe thoughts without being swept away. When a child finally ties shoes without looking, the child feels a sense of mastery. That feeling is a tiny glimpse of the self recognizing its own ability. When a driver picks a route that avoids traffic, the driver feels control over the journey. Both moments show the self at work, a mind that can learn, plan, and reflect. The ancient philosophers each offered a way to understand those moments. Plato saw the mind reaching for an unchanging pattern. Aristotle saw the mind shaping matter, and the Stoics saw the mind aligning with a rational order. In the academy, the debate over whether the forms exist continued for generations. One story tells of a young philosopher named Diogenes Laertius, who visited the academy and asked the teachers, "If the forms are perfect, why do we see so many imperfect things?" The teachers answered that the imperfect things are shadows of the perfect forms, like reflections in a pond. Diogenes laughed and said, "A pond can be still or rippled. The reflection changes with the water." This anecdote highlights the tension between static ideals and the fluid world, a tension that modern thinkers still wrestle with. In the Roman Senate, the discussion of virtue often turned to the Stoic idea that virtue is sufficient for happiness. A senator named Cato argued that a man who lives according to reason cannot be truly unhappy, even if he loses wealth. His opponent, a wealthy merchant, countered that loss of wealth can cause real suffering, showing that the Stoic claim may overlook the emotional impact of change. This debate mirrors the modern argument that rational acceptance may not fully address the depth of human feeling. The ancient analogies still help people picture abstract ideas. The puppet and its strings make the notion of an unseen guide easy to see. The carpenter's perfect chair helps explain how an inner model can shape outward work. The fire that burns inside the Stoic teaches that a rational spark can stay steady even when the wind changes. By using these simple images, the ancient philosophers turned deep questions into stories that anyone can follow. Later, when modern psychology examines how people form identities, it will return to these images. The idea that the self is a story we tell ourselves, a narrative that links past, present, and future, can be traced back to Aristotle's view of the soul as a continuous activity. The belief that we can change our judgments to change our feelings comes straight from the Stoics. Even the modern debate over whether there is a core self that persists over time echoes Plato's search for an unchanging form of the self. In sum, the ancient thinkers each painted a picture of the self that still matters today. Plato's puppet shows a self guided by perfect ideas. Aristotle's blend of matter and form shows a self that is both body. The narrator begins by pointing out that the idea of identity looks very different in the East. In Buddhism, the word self is treated as a trick of the mind. The Buddha taught that what we call lives is not a solid thing that lasts forever. He said, "All things are impermanent, All things are without self. In simple words, the Buddha meant that the mind and the body are always changing, like clouds that drift across the sky. When a cloud moves, it never stays the same shape. In the same way, a person's thoughts, feelings, and sensations are always moving. The Buddhist term for this is anatta, which translates as no self. The word sounds harsh, but it simply says that there is no unchanging core that can be pointed to and held fixed. In Hindu thought, a very different picture appears. The Hindu scriptures speak of an Atman, a true self that is eternal and pure. The Upanishads say, Sartattvam asis, that thou art. The quote tells us that the inner self is the same as the ultimate reality, called Brahman. In this view, the Atman is like a deep river that runs beneath the surface of a stream. The water on the surface may splash, swirl, and change, but the river below keeps flowing toward the sea. The Atman is that deep flow, steady and unchanging, even while the mind and body appear to shift. Both ideas use images that help a listener see the point. One common analogy for the Buddhist view is a river's flow. Imagine a river that never stops moving. The water that touches your hand now will soon be gone, replaced by new water. The river is still a river, but no single drop stays the same. The Buddhist would say that the self is like the river's shape. It appears, it changes, but there is no single drop that can be called the self. The Hindu analogy often uses a garden's growth. Picture a garden that is planted, tended, and harvested. The garden changes with the seasons. Yet the gardener's intention, the seed's potential, remains the same. The Atman is like that seed, a core that stays even as the garden grows. A day at work gives a clear, everyday example of the Buddhist idea. In the morning, a person may feel calm and focused. By noon, the stress of meetings may bring irritation. By late afternoon, a sense of fatigue may appear. The mood shifts, the thoughts shift, the body shifts. Yet the person still calls themselves the same. The Buddhist would point out that is feeling calm is not the same oi that feels irritated. The label mayu is a habit of the mind, not a fixed thing. In the same workday, a recipe can illustrate the Hindu view. A chef starts with a basic dough. He adds flour, water, salt, and then lets it rest. The dough rises, changes texture, and finally becomes bread. The ingredients change, the shape changes, but the intention to make bread stays the same. The Atman is like that intention, the inner purpose that guides the transformation. A second, everyday example shows how a mood can affect a conversation. A friend calls during a stressful moment. The listener may answer sharply, then later feel sorry for the tone. The listener may wonder why they acted that way. The Buddhist answer would be that the sharp tone was a momentary wave of anger, not the true self. The listener can see the wave and let it pass, without blaming a permanent self. In contrast, the Hindu perspective would say that the listener's deeper character, the Atman, remains kind and compassionate. The momentary anger is just a surface ripple on a deeper lake of goodness. There are strong counter-arguments to both views. One common objection to the Buddhist no-self idea is that it seems to erase personal responsibility. If there is no self, the argument goes, how can anyone be held accountable for actions? The critic says, if I am just a flow of thoughts, how can I be blamed for hurting someone? Buddhist teachers respond that responsibility does not depend on a fixed self. They say that actions have consequences, and the mind that creates those actions still exists in the present moment. The Buddha taught, your actions are the seeds you plant now, and they will grow later. In this sense, the mind can still be guided, even if there is no permanent self behind it. Another objection comes from the Hindu side. Some say that the idea of an eternal Atman can lead to selfishness, because a person might think their inner self is above the world. The critic asks, if the Atman is eternal and pure, why should one care about others? Hindu teachers answer that the Atman is not a private island. The Upanishads explained that the Atman is the same as Brahman, the universal reality that includes all beings. When a person sees themselves as part of that whole, compassion follows naturally. The ancient text says, when the self sees the world as itself, it acts with love. This shows that the Atman can be a source of responsibility, not an excuse for indifference. History provides vivid stories that show how these ideas spread. In the 12th century, a Japanese monk named Dogen traveled to China to study Zen. He returned home and wrote a simple guide called the Shobogenzo. Dogen taught that meditation is like watching a river flow without trying to stop it. He said, when the mind sits still, the true nature of self appears as empty space. Zen spread across Japan, influencing tea ceremony, poetry, and even martial arts. The story of Dogen's journey illustrates how the no-self idea moved from a quiet mountain in India to the bustling cities of Kyoto, changing the way people thought about who they are. A different story comes from the Bhakti movement in medieval India. Devotees like Mirabai sang songs that praised a personal god, but they also spoke of an inner self that longs for union with the divine. Mirabai wrote, my heart is a garden where love blooms, and the seed of the divine lives within. The Bhakti poets emphasized feeling and love over strict ritual. Their teachings helped ordinary people see that the Atman is not only for scholars, but for anyone who opens their heart. The movement spread across the subcontinent, turning the idea of an inner self into a living practice that shaped music, dance, and daily prayer. These two historical moments show how ideas about identity can travel and change. Zen took the Buddhist concept of emptiness and turned it into a practice of sitting quietly, breathing, and noticing thoughts as they pass. The Bhakti saints took the Hindu idea of an inner self and turned it into songs that anyone could sing. Both movements made the abstract ideas of no self and Atman feel real to ordinary people. The modern world still uses these ancient insights. In psychology, the Buddhist view of no self helps people understand why thoughts about I am not good enough can be let go. Therapists ask clients to watch thoughts like clouds, not to cling to them. In ethics, the Hindu notion of Atman inspires a sense of unity with the environment. Some activists say, if the self is the same as the earth, then harming the planet is harming ourselves. Both perspectives give tools for dealing with stress, conflict, and climate change. Later sections of the series will look at how identity connects with consciousness. The next part will ask whether the mind is a separate thing or just a pattern of activity. It will also compare Western ideas of personal identity with the Eastern views just explored. By keeping the river and garden images in mind, listeners can see how identity can be both fluid and rooted, depending on the lens used. Returning to the river analogy, imagine standing on a bridge and watching water rush by. One might try to catch a single drop, but the drop slips away. The river keeps moving, and the bridge stays in place. The Buddhist view says that the bridge is an illusion. Only the flow is real. The Hindu view says the bridge is built on a solid foundation, the Atman, that does not move. Both pictures help a listener think about what it means to be a person. Returning to the garden analogy, think of a seed that sprouts, grows leaves, bears fruit, and eventually withers. The plant changes each season, yet the seed's potential stays inside. The Hindu story says that the seed is the Atman, the hidden core. The Buddhist story says that the seed is just a pattern that appears and disappears, and there is no permanent thing inside. Both images show how change and continuity can be felt at the same time. In everyday life, a person may notice that their taste in music shifts over the years. As a teenager, they liked rock. As an adult, they enjoy jazz. The Buddhist would say that the preference is a passing wave on the mind's surface. The Hindu would say that the deeper love for rhythm is a sign of the Atman's taste for harmony. Both explanations can help a person accept change without losing a sense of self. Another daily picture is the way a family recipe changes when a new ingredient is added. The dish still feels familiar, but each version has a new flavor. The Buddhist sees the new flavor as a momentary condition that does not alter the empty nature of the dish. The Hindu sees the recipe as an expression of the Atman's creative spark, which can be expressed in many forms. Both views honor the continuity of the dish while allowing for growth. Critics sometimes argue that the Buddhist no-self leads to nihilism, the belief that nothing matters. They point to the phrase, "all is empty," and think it means nothing is real. Buddhist teachers clarify that emptiness does not mean non-existence. It means that things do not have an independent, unchanging core. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form." This line tells us that the world appears, but it does not have a hidden solid block behind it. Responsibility, compassion, and meaning arise precisely because things are interdependent and not fixed. A second criticism of the Hindu Atman is that it can be used to justify social hierarchy. In some historical periods, people claimed that certain castes were closer to the Atman than others. Reformers argued that the true Atman is the same in every being, regardless of birth. The Bhakti saints responded with songs that said, "The divine lives in every heart, no matter the name or status." Their verses helped break down barriers and reminded people that the inner self is a shared light. The spread of Zen in Japan offers a concrete example of how the no-self idea shaped daily practice. Zen monks would sit in a small hall, count their breaths, and listen to the wind through pine trees. They learned to let thoughts come and go, like leaves floating on a stream. When a monk finally understood that the self was like a wave, he could act with calm and clarity. This calmness spread to the tea ceremony, where the host moves with the same smooth flow, showing respect for each guest as part of the same river. The Bhakti movement's emphasis on inner self also changed how people worshipped. Instead of only performing elaborate rituals at a temple, devotees sang simple songs at home, feeling the presence of the divine within. Mirabai's poetry often spoke of a personal connection. "My soul drinks the nectar of love, and the world becomes a garden of light." Her words made the idea of Atman feel intimate and personal, not just a philosophical concept. These stories show that ideas about identity are not locked in ancient texts. They live in art, music, and daily habits. A modern student may practice mindfulness, noticing thoughts as they arise, echoing the Buddhist teaching of no self. A modern activist may chant Tattvam Aseus while planting trees, seeing the Atman in every leaf, echoing the Hindu view of unity. The discussion now turns to how these Eastern ideas compare with Western thoughts about personal identity. In the next segment, the narrator will explore the views of philosophers like Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am," and will ask how that claim fits with the river and garden images. The goal will be to see whether the self is a solid rock, a flowing river, or a garden seed, and what that, the modern chapter on identity, begins with René Descartes, a French thinker who loved mathematics and clear thinking. He imagined a mirror that shows not a face but a thought. When a person looks into that mirror, the only thing that cannot be hidden is the fact that they are thinking. Descartes wrote the famous line, "Cogito, ergo sum," which means, "I think, therefore I am." In the mirror of thought, the image is the act of thinking itself. That simple image helps a viewer see why Descartes believed the mind is the first thing that can be known. A second thinker, John Locke, used a different everyday object, a diary. Locke said that a person's identity is like the entries in a diary that are written over time. The diary keeps a record of experiences, and those records link the past self to the present self, Locke wrote. For identity of a person consists in the sameness of a rational soul and of its memories. The diary analogy shows that memory is the glue that holds the story of a self together. David Hume, a Scottish philosopher, pushed the idea further. He looked at a theatre, not a mirror or a diary, but a stage where many perceptions appear, act, and then leave. Hume wrote, "The mind is a kind of theatre, where several perceptions make their appearance, pass, and vanish." For Hume, the self is just a bundle of these fleeting perceptions. There is no hidden core that stays the same. The bundle changes every moment, like actors swapping roles. Jean-Paul Sartre, a French existentialist, brought a new angle after the wars. He imagined a blank canvas that each person must paint every day. Sartre said, "Existence precedes essence." In his view, there is no fixed nature waiting to be discovered. The person must create meaning through choices. Freedom becomes the paintbrush, and each stroke defines who the person is. These four thinkers each give a picture of identity that can be felt in everyday life. Imagine a birthday party. A child remembers the cake, the songs, the smiles. That memory links the child's past self to the present self. The diary of Locke would write down the candles, the laughter, the gifts. The mirror of Descartes would show that the child is thinking about the party, and that thinking proves the child's existence in that moment. Hume would notice that the feelings of joy, the taste of frosting, the sound of music are all separate perceptions that appear and fade. Sartre would say the child's choice to smile, to share the cake, to thank the guests is an act of freedom that creates the child's identity. Now picture a different scene. A person walking into a crowded room, feeling a sudden rush of heat, a blush, and the sense that everyone is looking. The embarrassment is a perception that flashes in the mind. The mirror of Descartes reflects the fact that the person is aware of that feeling. The diary of Locke would note the earlier moment when the person learned that being seen can cause shame, and that note connects the past to the present. Hume would treat the blush, the heartbeat, the thought, "I am embarrassed," as separate perceptions that come together for a short time. Sartre would highlight the choice to either stay silent, laugh, or leave the room, showing how freedom shapes the response, and thus the person's identity in that moment. Each philosopher also faced strong counterarguments. For Descartes, one objection is that thinking alone does not tell how the body fits into the picture. Critics ask, if the mind is known through a mirror, where does the body appear? This question links back to earlier sections on mind-body links, where the relationship between mental certainty and physical reality is examined. Another challenge to Descartes comes from the problem of other minds. If only one's own thoughts are certain, how can one be sure that other people also have thoughts? This doubt raises the issue of whether identity can be shared or only private. Locke's diary idea also meets objections. First, memory can be unreliable. A person may forget a birthday or misremember a detail, yet still feel they are the same person. If identity depends on memory, does a faulty diary break the link? This criticism points to the need for a stronger anchor than memory alone. Second, critics argue that a diary records only mental events, leaving out the body's role. The body changes, ages, and sometimes fails. How can a diary of thoughts capture the whole person? This question again touches the mind-body discussion, reminding viewers that identity may need both mental and physical parts. Hume's bundle theory faces two main counterpoints. One objection says that if the self is just a collection of fleeting perceptions, there is no room for responsibility. How can a person be praised or blamed if there is no stable self that acts over time? This challenge connects to the later section on freedom, where Sartre's view of choice offers a different answer. A second critique points out that everyday experience feels like there is a continuous self. People speak of "for-me life" as a single story, not a series of unrelated moments. If the bundle view denies a single story, it seems to clash with common language and practice. Sartre's existential canvas also meets resistance. The first counterargument claims that not everyone feels free to paint their own picture. Social, economic, and biological constraints limit choices, making the claim of total freedom seem unrealistic. This objection links back to the earlier discussion on freedom, where the limits of freedom are explored. A second objection says that if existence truly precedes essence, then there is no basis for moral standards. Without a fixed nature, how can society agree on right and wrong? Critics argue that some stable values are needed for a functioning community. Historical anecdotes bring these ideas to life. In the mid-1700s, Parisian salons gathered thinkers, artists, and nobles in elegant rooms. One night, a young woman named Madame de Pompadour hosted a discussion where Descartes' ideas about the thinking self were compared to the latest scientific experiments on the human body. Guests argued over whether the mind could be measured like a thermometer. The lively debate showed how Descartes' mirror analogy sparked conversation about the link between thought and flesh, a theme that still echoes in modern mind-body studies. Later, after World War II, a small café in existentialist Paris became a hub for writers and philosophers. Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir would sit at the same table, sipping coffee while observing the patrons. One rainy evening, a soldier returned from the front and confessed that he felt lost, as if his old self had died in the trenches. Sartre listened and replied that the soldier could now choose a new path, that his existence was a blank page waiting for a new story. The café scene illustrates how existential ideas about freedom and self-creation entered everyday conversations, shaping how people thought about identity after trauma. These anecdotes connect to the broader narrative of modern identity theory. They show that philosophy is not locked in dusty books, but lives in social gatherings, in cafes, in salons, and in the simple acts of remembering a birthday or feeling a blush. The mirror, diary, theatre, and canvas each help a viewer picture a different angle of the self. They also remind a listener that the mind and body, memory and perception, freedom and responsibility all play a part. When the video returns to the section on mind-body links, it will be clear how Descartes' certainty about thought meets the body's mystery. The mirror reflects the mind, but the body remains behind the glass. Locke's diary notes both mental events and the physical sensations that accompany them, hinting at a partnership. Hume's theatre shows perceptions flickering, some of them bodily, like the feeling of heat on the skin. Sartre's canvas paints choices that involve both mental intention and bodily action. By cross-referencing these ideas, the audience can see that identity is a tapestry woven from many threads, each thread simple on its own but stronger together. The discussion also loops back to the section on freedom. Sartre's claim that existence precedes essence, places freedom at the core of identity. Hume's bundle theory, while skeptical of a stable self, still allows freedom in the way perceptions are arranged. Locke's diary suggests that freedom appears in the decisions recorded in the pages, while Descartes' thinking self can choose what to think about, showing a basic form of freedom. The interplay of freedom with the other thinkers creates a richer picture of who a person is. To bring the ideas home, the script offers two more relatable scenarios. First, imagine a student who studies for a test, then forgets the material the night before. The student's diary entry notes the hours of study, the stress, the confidence. The mirror of thought shows the student's awareness of the test, the anxiety, the hope. Hume would say the student's mind is a bundle of sensations. The cramming, the fatigue, the lingering doubt. Sartre would ask the student to choose whether to accept the result or to try again, highlighting freedom. Second, picture an older adult who looks at old photographs and feels a mix of pride and loss. The diary records the events captured in the pictures. The mirror reflects the adult's awareness of aging. Hume notes the shifting perceptions of joy, nostalgia, and sorrow. Sartre reminds the adult that each new day offers a chance to paint a fresh stroke, even as the past remains on the canvas. Quotes from the original thinkers reinforce each point. Descartes, il cogito, ergo sum, reminds that thinking is the first proof of existence. Locke's for identity of a person consists in the sameness of a rational soul, and of its memories ties memory to personal continuity. Hume's the mind is a kind of theatre, where several perceptions make their appearance, pass, and vanish, captures the fleeting nature of experience. Sartre's existence precedes essence, declares that identity is made by action, not by a preset nature. The modern philosophical landscape, therefore, offers four distinct lenses. The mirror shows certainty of thought. The diary tracks memory over time. The theatre displays a flow of perceptions. The canvas demands creative choice. Each lens can be used to understand a birthday memory, an embarrassed moment, a study session, or an old photograph. Each lens also faces challenges, as shown by the counter-arguments. Together they form a conversation that has been alive in salons, cafes, and everyday rooms for centuries. By the end of this segment, the viewer can see that identity is not a single stone, but a collection of reflections, records, performances, and paintings. The ideas of Descartes, Locke, Hume, and Sartre each add a piece to the puzzle. The puzzle fits into larger themes of how mind and body connect, and how freedom shapes the picture. The story of identity continues, inviting each person to look into the mirror, open the diary, watch the theatre, and pick up the brush. The next part of the video will explore how these ideas influence modern science and technology, showing that the old questions still matter in a world of brains, machines, and digital lives. The idea that a body shapes who a person feels they are is as old as thought itself. When a child looks at a mirror and sees a new mole, a new scar, or a different hairstyle, the child often asks, "Was this still me?" That simple question opens a wide road that philosophers have walked for centuries. In this part of the story, the focus is on how physical traits, health, and aging touch the sense of self. A calm voice will guide the listener through analogies, everyday moments, old stories, and modern ideas, all while keeping the words plain and the tone gentle. Imagine a smartphone. When it is first bought, the screen is bright and clear. Over time, the screen gets scratches, fingerprints, maybe a crack. The phone still works, but the look of the device has changed. The phone's function stays the same, yet the owner may feel a little different about it. In the same way, a human body is like that screen. The flesh, the hair, the skin, the voice all can change, but the mind that thinks and feels often stays the same. This picture helps keep the idea clear without heavy words. A first everyday example is a scar after surgery. A person who needed an operation to fix a broken bone may walk away with a line of white tissue on the arm. The scar is visible, it may feel different to the touch, and it can be a reminder of pain. Yet many people say that the scar does not erase who they are. It may even add a story to the self. The scar can become part of the personal narrative, a sign of survival, and a mark that others notice. The person may adjust the way they dress, the way they sit, but the inner sense of self often stays steady. A second everyday example is a new hairstyle. A teenager may cut long hair short, or a parent may dye hair a different color. The change is quick, it can be seen by friends, and it may bring a fresh feeling. Some people feel more confident, some feel odd at first. The hair does not change the memories or the thoughts, but it can shift how the world treats the person. The mirror shows a new shape, and the person may think, "Now I look more like the person I feel inside." This small shift shows how external form can touch inner feeling. Philosophers have long asked whether the body is the core of identity or just a dress that the mind wears. The ancient Greek thinker Plato wrote that the soul is the true self, and the body is a temporary house. He said, "The soul is immortal and unchanging, while the body is perishable." This view suggests that changes in the body do not affect the real self. Aristotle, a student of Plato, offered a softer view. He said that the soul and body work together, like the parts of a living thing. He wrote, "The form of a thing is what makes it what it is, and the matter is what it is made of." In plain terms, the shape of a person and the stuff they are made of both matter. Centuries later, René Descartes, a French thinker, made a famous claim. "I think, therefore I am." He meant that the act of thinking proves the existence of a mind that is separate from the body. Descartes saw the mind as a clear, distinct thing that does not depend on the shape of the body. He wrote, "Mind is a thing that does not need a body to be known." This idea gave rise to a strong belief that inner thoughts outweigh outward looks. John Locke, an English philosopher, brought a different angle. He said that personal identity is tied to memory. He wrote, "For the same person, there must be continuity of consciousness." In his view, if a person can remember past experiences, they remain the same person, even if their body changes. This view allows for a scar or a new hairstyle without breaking the chain of self, because the memory of who one was remains. These classic ideas set the stage for two main arguments about the body's role in identity. The first argument says that physical traits are a big part of who a person feels they are. The second argument says that the inner self, thoughts and memories are the main part, and the body is just a tool. The first argument points to how people often describe themselves. A person may say, "I am tall," "I am a runner," or "I have brown eyes." Those descriptions link the body to identity. In many cultures, physical traits are tied to family lines, to status, to health. When a person ages, the changes in skin, posture, and strength can feel like a shift in self. A senior who loses a tooth may feel less confident, and may even think of themselves as less capable. The body's condition can affect mood, social roles, and how others treat a person. All these factors show that the body can shape identity in everyday life. The second argument leans on the idea that the mind is the core. It says that a person's sense of self stays the same even when the body changes dramatically. A classic story is that of a ship called Theseus. If each plank of the ship is replaced one by one, is it still the same ship? Some say yes, because the pattern and purpose stay the same. Applied to the body, if each cell is replaced over time, is the person still the same? The mind-focused view says yes, because the pattern of thoughts and memories remains. This view also supports the belief that inner values, beliefs, and intentions are what truly define a person. Two counterarguments help test these ideas. The first counterargument claims that the inner self outweighs appearance. It points to people who keep the same sense of self despite major bodily changes. For example, a person who loses a limb in an accident may still feel the same self inside. They may adapt to a new way of moving, but their core values and memories stay. This case supports the claim that the mind is the anchor of identity. The second counterargument says that memory alone is not enough. It argues that the body provides essential cues that shape memory and self-understanding. A person with a disease that changes the brain, such as Alzheimer's, may lose memory and also lose the sense of self. The loss of bodily function can erode identity. This suggests that the body and mind are tightly linked, and that changes in the body can indeed change the self. Historical anecdotes give color to these debates. In ancient Egypt, people believed that the body was a vessel for the soul after death. They went to great lengths to preserve the body through mummification. The belief was that if the body stayed intact, the soul could recognize it in the afterlife and return. This practice shows how deeply the Egyptians linked the physical form to personal identity. They even placed a Locke statue, a representation of the soul, beside the mummy to keep the connection alive. The effort to keep the body whole reflects a view that the body is essential to who a person is, even beyond life. A later anecdote comes from the 19th century, when a pseudoscience called phrenology claimed that the shape of a person's skull revealed character traits. Phrenologists would feel the bumps on a head and say, "You are generous," or "You are impulsive." Though now discredited, phrenology showed how people once tried to read identity directly from the body. The belief that the outer shape could tell inner truth illustrates an early attempt to tie physical form to self. It also warns of the danger of over-relying on outward signs. Real-world applications of the body identity link appear in many places today. Doctors often ask patients how they feel about changes after surgery. A person who gets a mastectomy may need support to adjust their sense of self. Cosmetic surgeons work with clients who want to change their appearance to match an inner feeling. In legal contexts, identity documents rely on physical traits, face, fingerprints, iris scans, to confirm who a person is. These practices show that society still treats the body as a key marker of identity. Modern thinkers expand the discussion with new ideas. Bioethicists ask how far it is right to alter the body with technology. Transhumanists imagine a future where people replace parts of their bodies with machines, like a new screen on a phone. They wonder whether a person who has a brain-computer interface is still the same person. Some argue that as long as the pattern of thought stays, the person is unchanged. Others say that a major change to the body can create a new kind of self. Digital avatars add another layer. When someone creates an online picture of themselves, they may choose a completely different look, different hair, different skin tone, even a different gender. The avatar can feel like a true expression of the inner self, even if the real body looks different. This shows that the link between body and identity can be flexible, and that people can use new tools to align outward appearance with inner feeling. Two concrete modern examples help illustrate the point. First, organ transplantation. A person who receives a new heart may feel a deep sense of gratitude and may even feel that a part of another person lives inside them. Some recipients report a change in taste preferences or personality quirks, which they attribute to the new organ. This experience blurs the line between body and self, showing that a physical addition can feel like a change in identity. Second, gender transition. A transgender person who takes hormones and may have surgery to align their body with gender identity often describes a feeling of being seen as who they truly are. The change in body can bring the outward form into harmony with the inner sense. This process supports the idea that the body does shape identity, because the change can bring relief, confidence, and a stronger sense of self. These examples link naturally to later sections on gender and cultural identity. In the next part, the discussion will move from how the body changes to how culture and gender shape the story of self. The same ideas about appearance, memory, and inner feeling will appear, but now the focus will be on how societies label and treat people based on gender roles, language, and shared traditions. The body remains a key piece, but the social context adds new layers. Returning to the core question, the script asks, Does a scar change who a person is? Does a new hairstyle make a person a different person? The answer is not a simple yes or no. The body certainly adds marks that people notice, and those marks can affect how a person feels and how others treat them. At the same time, the mind holds onto memories, values, and intentions that keep a thread of continuity. The balance between the two can shift over a lifetime. A quote from the ancient Roman writer Cicero captures this balance. He wrote, "Rule the soul is the true self, but the body is the instrument through which it works." This line reminds the listener that the body is a tool, not that the story of gender and sexual identity is a story about how people see themselves and how they are seen by others. In the earlier part of the video, the narrator talked about cultural identity and how it shapes the way a person lives. In this part, the focus turns to the ways that gender roles, sexual orientation, and modern identity politics intersect. The aim is to make these ideas clear with simple language, everyday examples, and real stories from the past. Gender roles are the ideas that a society has about how men and women should act. These ideas can be as simple as human fixed things, or as complex as a whole set of expectations about work, family, and public life. Sexual orientation is the pattern of attraction a person feels toward others. Some people feel attracted to the opposite sex, some to the same sex, and some to both or to many. Modern identity politics is the practice of organizing around these personal identities to ask for respect, rights, and recognition. One way to picture gender and sexual identity is to think of a costume. A costume can be put on, taken off, or changed at any time. It can be a uniform for a job, a dress for a party, or a mask for a play. The costume does not change the person underneath, but it does affect how the world treats the person. In the same way, gender and sexual identity can be seen as a set of outward signs that help others understand a person, while the inner self may be different from those signs. The costume analogy also shows that a person can swap outfits, just as a person can change how they express gender or how they label their sexuality. Consider the simple act of choosing clothes for a job interview. A person might pick a suit because the interview is for a corporate role. The suit sends a signal that the person is professional, organized, and fits the expectations of the workplace. If the same person were to go to a creative art studio interview, they might choose a bright shirt and a relaxed jacket. The change in clothing does not change the person's abilities, but it changes how the interviewers see them. In the same way, a person may present a gendered appearance that matches the setting they are in. The choice can be practical, not a statement about who they are at the deepest level. This example shows how external signs can be flexible and chosen. Now think of a teen who tells friends that they are gay. The teen may have been careful about how they speak, what they wear, and who they sit with. When the teen shares the truth, the friends may react with surprise, support, or confusion. The teen's identity does not change at that moment, but the way the teen is seen does. The friends now have new information that helps them understand the teen's choices and feelings. This moment is a small but powerful example of how identity is shared and recognized in everyday life. These examples help to see that gender and sexual identity are not fixed objects. They are often shaped by personal feeling, cultural messages, and the needs of a particular situation. Yet there are people who argue that gender cannot change because it is set by biology. They point to chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs as the true basis of gender. This view says that a man is a man because of his XY chromosomes, and a woman is a woman because of her XX chromosomes. The argument holds that social signs are only a cover for an unchangeable biological fact. A second counterargument says that identity is only a social construction. It claims that gender and sexual labels are made by societies to keep order, and that there is no real inner truth behind them. According to this view, If a culture decided to label people differently, the labels would shift, but the underlying experience would stay the same. This line of thinking can be found in some sociological theories that stress the power of language and institutions over personal feeling. Both counterarguments have strengths and limits. The biological view points out real differences in bodies that affect health and development. It reminds us that some aspects of gender are linked to physical reality. The social construction view reminds us that many expectations about gender are learned, not innate, and that they can change over time. The truth often lies between the two. Most scholars today say that biology and society both play a role. The body provides a starting point, but the mind and culture shape how that point is understood. History offers many stories that show the mix of biology, culture, and personal feeling. In South Asia, there is a long-standing tradition of the Hijra community. Hijras are people who are born male but adopt a feminine gender role. They often live in groups, have their own rituals, and are recognized in some legal codes as a third gender. A Hijra elder once said, "We are the bridge between worlds. We are not men, we are not women, we are something else." This quote shows how the community sees itself as a distinct identity, not merely a role forced by society. The Hijra tradition dates back centuries, and it survived even when colonial powers tried to suppress it. The survival of the Hijra community illustrates that gender can be expressed in ways that differ from the dominant binary model. Another historic moment is the Gay Rights March of 1970 in New York City, known as the Christopher Street Liberation Day. Thousands of people gathered to protest the police raid on the Stonewall Inn. The march was a public claim that gay people deserve the same rights as anyone else. A speaker at the rally said, "We are here, we are queer, and we will not be silent." The quote captures the spirit of a group that was demanding legal recognition and social respect. The march sparked a movement that led to changes in laws, workplaces, and schools across the United States. It also showed how identity politics can bring people together to ask for legal rights. These anecdotes connect to the earlier discussion of cultural identity. Just as language, religion, and ethnicity shape a person's sense of belonging, gender and sexual identity add another layer. The legal rights section of the video explained how laws protect people from discrimination. In many countries, anti-discrimination statutes now include gender identity and sexual orientation. In some places, marriage laws have been changed to allow same-sex couples to marry. In others, schools have adopted policies that let students use the bathroom that matches their gender identity. These legal changes show that identity politics can move from personal feeling to public policy. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in many places. In a workplace, a manager might ask an employee what pronouns they prefer. Using the correct pronouns shows respect and can improve teamwork. In a school, a counselor might help a student who is questioning their gender find resources and support groups. In a health clinic, a doctor might ask about a patient's sexual orientation to give better advice about screenings. Each of these actions reflects an understanding that identity matters for everyday decisions. Modern interpretations of gender and sexual identity have expanded beyond the simple male or gay-straight categories. Many people now use terms like non-binary, gender-fluid, pansexual, or asexual. Non-binary means that a person does not feel fully male or fully female. Gender-fluid means that a person's sense of gender can change over time, like a tide that moves in and out. Pansexual means that a person can be attracted to others regardless of gender. Asexual means that a person does not feel sexual attraction at all. These terms help people describe experiences that did not fit older labels. They also show that language can grow to match lived reality. The rise of these new terms has led to debates. Some argue that the proliferation of labels makes it harder to have a common conversation. Others say that having precise words helps people feel seen and reduces stigma. Both sides care about clarity and respect, but they differ on how best to achieve it. The discussion mirrors the earlier counter-argument about whether identity is purely social. In practice, language both reflects and shapes how people think about themselves. An analogy can help to see the balance. Imagine a garden. The soil is the biological foundation. It provides nutrients and structure. The plants are the personal feelings and identities that grow from that soil. The gardener is the culture, shaping how the plants are arranged, which ones are encouraged, and which are trimmed. If the gardener only follows old rules, some plants may never flourish. If the gardener ignores the soil, the plants may wither. Good gardening respects both the soil and the plants, while also being open to new designs. In the same way, a healthy view of gender and sexual identity respects biology, honors personal feeling, and listens to cultural change. Returning to the costume analogy, think of a theatre troupe that rehearses a play. Each actor may play many roles over a season. The actor's skill is not limited to one costume. Likewise, a person may feel comfortable in many gender expressions over a lifetime. The audience may need time to understand each new role, but the actor's talent remains the same. This picture helps to see why it is reasonable for a person to shift how they present themselves without being accused of inconsistency. The legal rights discussion earlier noted that many countries now protect gender identity under anti-discrimination law. In Canada, the Canadian Human Rights Act was amended to include gender identity and expression in 2017. A Canadian court once said, "The law must protect the dignity of people whose gender identity does not match the sex assigned at birth." This quote shows how the legal system can affirm identity. In contrast, some nations still criminalize same-sex relationships or deny recognition of gender variance. Those places illustrate the ongoing struggle for equal rights. Cultural identity also plays a role in how gender is understood. In many indigenous cultures in North America, there are traditions of two-spirit people. Two-spirit is a term that describes people who embody both masculine and feminine qualities. A tribal elder once explained, "We honor those who walk both paths. They bring balance to the community." This perspective predates modern Western ideas and shows that diverse gender concepts have existed for a long time. It also links gender identity to spiritual and communal roles, not just personal preference. The modern identity politics movement builds on these historic examples. Activists use social media, protests, and legal challenges to ask for recognition. They also create safe spaces where people can share stories. The teen coming out example earlier reflects how a personal story can ripple into a larger community. When a teen tells friends, those friends may become allies, start conversations, or even change their own views. Small acts of sharing can add up to big cultural shifts. Critics of identity politics sometimes claim that focusing on personal categories divides society. They argue that emphasizing differences can lead to tribalism. This critique is worth listening to, because a healthy society needs both unity and respect for difference. The balance can be found by treating identity as a part of the whole person, not the only part. In a workplace, for example, a team can value diverse perspectives while still working toward common goals. The same principle applies to schools, families, and governments. Another critique says that legal protections for gender identity can be overreaching. Some worry that allowing people to change gender markers on official documents without medical proof could be abused. This fear often stems from misunderstanding how gender identity is diagnosed and supported. Language, traditions, and borders all work together to shape the feeling of who a person is. When a child hears a song at a family gathering, when a neighbor greets a passerby in a local dialect, when a community lights candles on a holiday night, each of those moments adds a small piece to a larger picture. That picture is called cultural identity, and when many people share the same picture, it becomes a national identity. The idea can be seen as a recipe that is handed down from one generation to the next. A recipe tells which spices to add, how long to simmer, and what dish to serve at a feast. In the same way, language tells which words are used, traditions tell which actions are repeated, and borders tell where the shared story begins and ends. The result is a flavor that feels familiar to those who grew up with it. One everyday example shows how a holiday can act as a cultural marker. In a small town in Mexico, families gather each year for Dia de los Muertos. They clean the graves, build colorful altars, and place favorite foods of the departed on the table. The smell of pan de muerto, the bright orange marigolds, and the soft chants of a lullaby all remind participants that they belong to a community that honors its ancestors in a special way. The same ritual, when performed in a different country, would feel strange because the symbols and songs would not match the local memory. The holiday becomes a sign that says, "This is who we are." A second everyday example comes from the way people speak at home. In the Scottish Highlands, many families use a dialect called Gaelic alongside English. When a child learns the old words for true mountain, river, and friend, the child carries a piece of the landscape inside the mind. Even if the child later moves to a city where English dominates, the sound of Gaelic in the kitchen or at the family table still ties the child to the hills and to the people who have spoken those sounds for centuries. The dialect acts like a secret ingredient that only those who grew up with it can taste. These small moments add up to a larger story that nations tell about themselves. The story can be traced back to thinkers who first asked what makes a group feel like a single body. Johann Gottfried Herder, an 18th century German philosopher, wrote that language is the organ of thought. He meant that the words a people use shape the way they think about the world. If language changes, the way a group sees itself also shifts. Herder's idea helps explain why a language that disappears can feel like a loss of self for its speakers. Another influential voice is Benedict Anderson, a 20th century scholar who called nations imagined communities. He said that people who will never meet each other still feel a bond because they share symbols, stories, and a common name. The word imagined does not mean fake. It means that the connection is built in the mind, like a picture that many people keep in their heads. This picture is drawn with the help of newspapers, songs, sports teams, and school textbooks. Each of those items adds a brushstroke to the national portrait. The picture is not static. History shows how it can be reshaped by events that change borders or bring new ideas. During the Renaissance, the Italian peninsula was split into many city-states such as Florence, Venice, and Milan. Each city-state had its own language variant, its own patron saints, and its own set of laws. Citizens of Florence felt a strong loyalty to their city's art, its banking system, and its famous families. They called themselves Florentines first, and Italians later. The rivalry between city-states meant that cultural identity was tied to a small geographic area, not to a large nation. The story of the Renaissance city-states shows how borders can define a sense of belonging even when the people share a larger language family. A second historical anecdote comes from the wave of independence movements after World War III. In India, leaders like Mahatma Gandhi urged people to reclaim their own cultural symbols. Gandhi encouraged the use of the spinning wheel, a simple tool for making cloth, as a sign of self-reliance. He also promoted the celebration of local festivals, such as Pongal in the south and Bihu in the east, as ways to remind people of their shared heritage. When India finally gained independence in 1947, the new nation built its flag, its anthem, and its constitution around the idea of unity in diversity. The story shows how a political change can bring a new national identity that is built on many cultural threads. These stories help explain why cultural and national identity are often linked to personal identity. A person may think of themselves as a student, a sibling, a lover of music, and also as a member of a particular culture. The cultural layer gives meaning to the personal layer. When a person speaks a dialect at home, that act reinforces the feeling of being part of a larger group. When that same person travels to a new country and meets people who speak a different language, the contrast can make the original dialect feel even more important. The feeling of belonging to a cultural group can also affect how a person behaves in social settings, such as at school or at work. In this way, cultural identity is a bridge between the inner sense of self and the outer world of society. Not everyone agrees that culture and borders always help people feel secure. One counterargument says that globalization is erasing distinct cultures. The spread of fast food chains, the dominance of English on the internet, and the worldwide popularity of pop music are often pointed to as signs that local traditions are fading. A critic might note that a teenager in Kenya now watches the same streaming shows as a teenager in Japan, eats the same burgers, and uses the same slang online. The critic argues that when everyone shares the same brands and the same memes, the unique flavor of each culture disappears, leaving a bland global dish. This view sees the recipe of cultural identity as being replaced by a single, mass-produced menu. A second counterargument claims that national identity can be used as a political tool rather than a natural expression of culture. Politicians may emphasize a shared language, history, or religion to rally support for policies that benefit a particular group. For example, a leader might invoke our glorious past to justify a crackdown on dissent or to exclude minorities who do not speak the dominant language. The argument says that national identity is sometimes manufactured to gain power, not to reflect an authentic cultural bond. In this view, the borders and symbols are drawn to serve a political agenda, and the feeling of belonging may be forced rather than freely chosen. Both counter-arguments have merit, but they also overlook the ways people adapt and keep traditions alive. Even as global brands appear everywhere, local markets often add their own twist. A fast food chain in India may serve a paneer burger, while the same chain in Mexico offers a taco-style wrap. The global spread of English does not stop people from speaking their mother tongues at home or in community gatherings. In fact, many people learn a second language while still keeping their first language alive. The ability to mix and match shows that cultural identity can be flexible, like a stew that can accept new ingredients without losing its core flavor. Similarly, the political use of national identity does not erase the genuine feelings people have for their culture. When a community celebrates a holiday, sings a folk song, or tells a story about an ancestor, those actions come from a place deeper than any political slogan. The political layer may try to shape the narrative, but the everyday practices keep the original meaning alive. A family that gathers for Diwali each year does so because the lights remind them of hope and renewal, not because a government told them to. The personal joy of the ritual can survive political manipulation. Modern thinkers have tried to describe how cultural identity works in the digital age. Some say that the internet acts like a new kind of border, one that is drawn by algorithms instead of walls. When a person joins an online community that shares the same dialect, the same jokes, and the same memes, that community can feel like a virtual village. The feeling of belonging can be just as strong as the feeling of belonging to a physical town. Yet the digital village also allows people to meet others from different cultures, creating a mix of recipes. The result can be a hybrid identity that blends elements from several cultures. Another modern view looks at how migration changes the picture of national identity. When families move from one country to another, they bring their language, their food, and their customs. Over time, the host country may adopt some of those customs, while the newcomers may adopt some of the host's customs. The process is like a potluck dinner where each guest brings a dish and everyone shares. The shared meal becomes richer because of the variety. In this sense, borders are not walls that stop culture, but borders that define where different flavors meet. The connection between cultural identity and personal identity also appears in the way people choose their names. In many cultures, a child receives a name that reflects a family story, a religious belief, or a hope for the future. The name becomes a reminder of the cultural heritage each time it is spoken. When a person introduces themselves with a name that carries a meaning in their language, that small act signals a link to a larger story. Even if the person lives far from their homeland, the name can keep the cultural thread alive. Language itself can be seen as a living archive of history. Words often contain clues about past ways of life. For example, the English word cottage comes from an old term for a small house that farmers used. When a child hears the word, the image of a thatched roof and a garden may appear, even if the child has never seen such a house. The word carries a piece of cultural memory. When a language dies, those memories can be lost. That is why some groups work hard to preserve endangered languages, writing dictionaries, recording stories, and teaching the language to the next generation. The effort shows how important language is to the feeling of who a people are. A famous quote from Ernest Renan, a 19th century French scholar, captures the idea of shared destiny. A nation is a soul, a spiritual principle. Renan meant that a nation lives in the hearts of its people, not just in maps. He added that this soul is built on common memories, a common language, and a common hope for the future. The quote helps explain why people feel a bond even when they have never met. The bond is not a legal contract, but a feeling that lives inside each person. Another quote comes from the philosopher Martin Heidegger, who said, "Language is the house of being." In simple terms, this means that the words we use shape the way we understand ourselves and the world. When a community shares a language, they also share a way of seeing. The shared view helps them build a common identity. The quote shows why language is more than a tool for communication. It is a foundation for identity. The ideas about cultural and national identity also link to the earlier discussion of personal identity. Personal identity is about how a person sees themselves as a single, continuous being over time. Cultural identity adds a layer that tells the person where they come from, what stories they inherit, and what customs they practice. Social identity, on the other hand, is about how a person fits into groups, such as a school. In the quiet flow of the video, the voice turns to the question of who a person is when the world is made of screens and signals. The scene is set with a simple image of a mask at a masquerade ball. The mask hides the face, but also lets the wearer choose a new look, a new role. In the digital age, the mask is no longer cloth and feathers, it is a profile picture, a username, a curated feed. The mask can be swapped in an instant, and it can be shown to millions at once. This image helps the viewer see how identity can feel both protected and exposed when it lives online. The first example comes from a familiar place, an Instagram feed. A person scrolls through pictures, selects a filter, writes a short caption, and posts. Each choice adds a brushstroke to a picture of the self that the world will see. The feed becomes a story that the person tells about their life, their tastes, their values. The second example appears in a gaming lobby where a player chooses a nickname like Silent Wolf or Pixel Knight. That name, the avatar, the way the player moves in the game, all become parts of a digital self that may be very different from the name on a birth certificate. Both examples show how people shape a version of themselves that fits the rules of a particular online space. The idea of a digital self is not new. In the early 1980s, hobbyists gathered around bulletin board systems, or BBSs, that ran on a single computer and let strangers type messages to each other. One early BBS posted the line, "Welcome to the BBS, where you can be anyone you want." Users would choose a handle, a short name that hid their real identity but let them speak freely. Those handles were early masks, and the messages they left created a sense of community that felt real to those who read them. The practice of using a handle set a pattern that would repeat on later platforms. A few decades later, a new kind of mask appeared on a site called Facebook. In 2004, Mark Zuckerberg wrote, "We are building a global community that connects people and makes the world more open and connected." The site asked each user to upload a photo, list their school, and write a short bio. By doing so, users presented a version of themselves that mixed facts with personal choice. The rise of Facebook turned the private mask into a public one that could be seen by friends, family, co-workers, and even strangers. The platform made the act of curating a self a daily habit for millions. The earlier discussion of self-presentation explained how people already manage their image in face-to-face interactions. The same skills now move into the digital world, but the tools have changed. In a conversation, a person might choose a calm tone, a friendly smile, a firm posture. Online, the same goals are reached by selecting a profile picture, editing a status, or replying with a meme. The shift from physical cues to digital symbols does not erase the need to manage how others see us. It simply changes the stage. One argument says that digital selves are more authentic than the faces we wear in the street. The claim rests on the idea that the internet removes social pressure, allowing people to speak their true thoughts. A quote from a 2010 study reads, "Online anonymity can reveal hidden aspects of personality that are suppressed in face-to-face settings." Proponents point to activists who hide behind pseudonyms to speak out against oppression, or to artists who share work that would be censored offline. They argue that the mask of the screen can be a shield that lets the real self emerge. A second argument pushes back, saying that digital selves are shallow and lack depth. Critics note that a profile picture can be edited, a caption can be written to impress, and a gaming nickname can be chosen for its cool factor rather than its truth. A philosopher from the early 2000s wrote, "When the self is reduced to a series of clicks and likes, it becomes a surface without substance." The criticism suggests that the ease of editing and the drive for approval turn identity into a performance aimed at gaining attention, not at expressing inner values. Both sides raise important points. The authenticity claim highlights the freedom that anonymity can bring. The shallow critique reminds the viewer that the tools of the internet also encourage a focus on appearance. The truth may lie somewhere in between, where the digital mask can both protect and distort. The voice invites the viewer to think of the mask not as a single layer, but as a set of layers that can be added or removed at will. The video then moves to real-world effects of these digital masks. In the job market, recruiters often look at a candidate's LinkedIn profile. A well-crafted profile can open doors, while a careless post can close them. The digital self, therefore, has economic power. In politics, a politician's tweet can shape public opinion in minutes. The tweet is a small mask that carries a lot of weight. Both cases show that the way a person presents themselves online can change real opportunities and outcomes. Another everyday scene shows a teenager scrolling through TikTok. The teenager sees a friend's video of a perfect morning routine, a clean desk, a bright smile. The teen may feel pressure to copy that routine, to present a similar image. The pressure to match the mask that others display can affect mental health. Studies have linked heavy social media use with feelings of inadequacy. The video mentions a 2021 report that states, young adults who compare their lives to curated online personas report higher levels of anxiety and lower self-esteem. The mask can thus become a source of stress. The discussion also touches on data tracking. Every click, every like, every pause on a video creates a trail that companies collect. That trail builds a profile of the user that can be used to target ads, recommend content, or even influence political views. The digital self is no longer only what the user chooses to show. It also includes what algorithms infer from behavior. A quote from a 2018 privacy report reads, "The invisible data you leave behind becomes a second self that can be bought and sold. This second self can shape the experience of the first, creating a feedback loop." Linking back to the earlier section on self-representation, the video notes that the same desire to be seen in a good light now drives both the visible mask and the hidden data profile. The earlier ideas about impression management help explain why people might edit a photo or choose a nickname. The later section on future trends will explore how emerging technologies like virtual reality and deep-fake avatars may add new layers to the mask, making the line between real and digital even harder to see. To illustrate how a mask can change, the video offers an analogy of a theatre stage. In a play, an actor steps into a role, puts on a costume, learns lines, and performs for an audience. After the curtain falls, the actor removes the costume and returns to their own life. In the digital world, the costume can stay on longer because the audience never truly leaves. A post can be shared, saved, and replayed. The mask can become a permanent part of a person's story. The video then revisits the early BBS anecdote. One user on a 1985 BBS wrote, "I am a poet, but I hide my name because the world does not understand my verses." That user later revealed the poems on a printed pamphlet, showing how the digital mask helped protect a fragile voice until it was ready to be seen. The story shows that a mask can be a stepping stone, not an end. It also shows how early online spaces gave people a chance to experiment with identity before the massive platforms took over. The rise of Facebook offers another anecdote. In 2006, a college student posted a photo of a protest rally captioned, "We stand together." The post was shared thousands of times, and the student's profile became a hub for activism. The student's digital mask, the public profile, turned into a tool for real-world change. The story illustrates how a mask can be both a shield and a megaphone, protecting the user while amplifying their voice. The voice now presents the two counter-arguments side by side. On one side, a scholar named Sherry Turkle wrote, The net gives us a place to be ourselves without the baggage of the body." On the other side, a critic named Nicholas Carr warned, "The constant stream of curated images turns us into shallow consumers of self-image." By placing the quotes together, the video lets the viewer hear the tension. The viewer can see that the digital mask can free the self but also trap it in a cycle of surface. The video then asks the viewer to imagine a day without masks. If a person logged into a social platform and posted a picture without a filter, without a caption, and used their real name, would that feel more honest? Or would it feel risky, exposing a part of themselves that they have kept hidden for safety? The question invites reflection on why masks exist at all. The answer may lie in the human need to belong, to be seen, and to protect what feels vulnerable. Turning to practical advice, the voice suggests that people treat their digital mask like a garden. They can choose what to plant, water, and prune. They can decide which weeds, unwanted data, or harmful habits to pull out. By being mindful, they can keep the garden healthy without letting it overrun their life. The analogy stays simple and fits the calm tone. The segment ends by linking forward. The next part will look at future trends such as augmented reality glasses that overlay a digital mask onto the real world, and blockchain-based identity systems that promise to give users control over their data. The voice reminds the viewer that the story of identity is still being written, and each click adds a new line. The calm narrator leaves the audience with a thought. The mask may never disappear, but it can be shaped with care, just like any other part of who we are. The story of who a person is can be seen as a long, slow film that runs in the mind. Each scene is a memory, each cut is a choice, and the whole reel becomes the picture of self. In the same way, a scrapbook holds a collection of photos, ticket stubs, and handwritten notes. When the pages are turned, the owner sees a pattern that tells a story about who they have been and who they are becoming. The idea that identity is built from personal stories and memories has been explored by philosophers, psychologists, and storytellers for centuries. This segment looks at how memory and narrative shape identity, how they can be questioned, and how they appear in everyday life. The first piece of the puzzle is memory. Memory is not a perfect recording of events. It is more like a soft clay that can be pressed, smoothed, and reshaped over time. When a child remembers the first day of school, the picture that appears is not a perfect photograph. The child may recall the bright colors of the classroom, the nervous feeling of holding a new backpack, and the voice of the teacher saying, "Welcome." At the same time, the child may forget the exact number of students in the room or the exact words spoken by the teacher. The memory still feels real, and it still tells the child something about who they were at that moment. In this way, the memory becomes a building block of identity. The child can say, "I am someone who once felt nervous but brave enough to walk into a new place." That statement is a small narrative that ties the past to the present self. A second everyday example comes from family legends. Imagine a family that tells the story of a great-grandfather who crossed a river on a makeshift raft during a flood. The story is told at reunions, at birthday parties, and in quiet evenings. Each retelling may add a new detail: a brave shout, a lucky fish that jumped beside the raft, a moment of silence before the water calmed. The listener hears the tale and sees themselves as part of a line that survived danger. The legend becomes a thread that links the present generation to a past hero. Even if the exact facts are fuzzy, the story still shapes the listener's sense of belonging and courage. The narrative tells the listener, "I come from people who faced challenges and found a way." These two examples show how personal stories and shared memories act like glue that holds together the pieces of identity. In psychology, this idea is called the narrative self. The theory says that people understand themselves by creating a story that links past events, present feelings, and future hopes. The story is not just a list of facts, it is a meaning-making process. When a person thinks about a memory, they also ask why it matters. Why does that first day of school feel important? Why does the family legend matter? The answers become part of the story that defines who the person is. But there are voices that question the strength of memory and narrative. One counterargument says that memory is unreliable. The philosopher David Hume warned that the mind is a bundle of impressions that can change. He wrote, "The mind is a theatre, where several perceptions successively make their appearance. If the stage changes each night, then the play that the mind sees is never the same." Modern research in psychology supports this view. Experiments show that after a few weeks, people can recall an event with details that never happened. This phenomenon is called false memory. When a person believes a false memory, they may build part of their identity on something that never existed. The claim that memory is unreliable suggests that identity built on memory can be shaky. A second counterargument focuses on the power to shape narratives. Narratives can be edited, exaggerated, or suppressed by those who tell them. The philosopher Michel Foucault argued that power and knowledge are linked, and that the stories a society tells can control how people see themselves. He noted, "Where there is power, there is resistance." In the context of identity, this means that a dominant group can craft a narrative that makes certain people feel less valuable, while others are praised. For instance, a school may celebrate academic achievement while ignoring artistic talent. Students who excel in art may feel that their story does not fit the school's narrative, and this can affect how they see themselves. The claim that narratives can be manipulated shows that identity is not always a free choice. It can be guided by external forces. Both counterarguments do not deny that stories matter. Instead, they ask for a careful look at how stories are formed and who gets to tell them. The answer lies in recognizing that memory and narrative are tools, not absolute truths. By checking facts, listening to different voices, and staying aware of bias, a person can build a more stable sense of self. History gives many examples of how societies used memory and narrative to shape identity. In ancient tribes, oral tradition was the main way to keep history alive. Elders would sit around a fire and repeat the deeds of ancestors. The story of a great hunt, a clever trick, or a brave defense against enemies was told again and again. Each telling added a small flourish, but the core message stayed. The tribe survived because of courage, cleverness, and cooperation. This oral tradition linked each new member to the past, giving them a sense of belonging. The tribe's identity was a living story that grew with each generation. A second historical moment came in the 18th century with the rise of the autobiography. Writers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau published personal accounts that mixed fact and feeling. Rousseau's Confessions opened with the line, "I was born on the day my mother first felt my breath." He used his own life as a way to explore human nature. The book invited readers to see the author as a person made of hopes, failures, and reflections. The autobiography turned private memory into public narrative. It showed that a single life could be examined like a story, and that the story could teach others about the human condition. This invention changed how people thought about self-knowledge. It made it common to write down personal memories and to share them, turning private identity into a public conversation. These two anecdotes illustrate how memory and narrative have been used across time to create a sense of self, both for individuals and for whole groups. The oral tales of ancient tribes gave a collective identity that survived migrations and wars. The autobiographies of the Enlightenment gave individuals a new way to claim their own voice. The link between memory, narrative, and identity also appears in modern cultural studies. Cultural identity is the feeling of belonging to a larger group, such as a nation, a religion, or an ethnic community. When a person learns the stories of that culture, myths, songs, festivals, they add those chapters to their own life story. For example, a child who learns the story of a national hero at school will feel a connection to that nation's past. The child may say, "I am part of a country that values bravery." The cultural story becomes a layer on top of personal memories, creating a richer identity. Psychology also studies how people edit their life stories to stay well adjusted. The concept of narrative coherence means that a person's story makes sense, has a clear beginning, middle, and end, and shows some growth. When a person can see a pattern, such as moving from fear to confidence, they feel more stable. In therapy, counselors often ask clients to tell their life story in a way that highlights strengths and learning. This process shows that shaping a narrative is a skill that can be practiced. Real-world applications of the memory-narrative link are everywhere. In education, teachers ask students to write memory essays about a day that changed them. The exercise helps students see how a single event fits into their larger self-picture. In marketing, companies build brand stories that customers can adopt as part of their identity. A brand that tells a story of adventure may attract people who see themselves as explorers. The brand story becomes part of the consumer's personal narrative. Another example appears in legal settings. Witnesses give testimony about what they remember. Their memories become part of a larger story that decides guilt or innocence. Because memory can be flawed, the legal system uses cross-examination and evidence checks to test the story. This shows how society tries to protect against the unreliability of memory when important decisions are made. The modern world also offers new ways to record and share memories. Digital photos, social media posts, and video diaries act like a never-ending scrapbook. Each post adds a page to the public story of a person's life. At the same time, the ease of editing means that the story can be altered quickly. A deleted post erases a memory from the public view, even if the person still remembers it. This raises the question: does the public story become more important than the private memory? When identity is displayed online, the narrative can be shaped by likes, comments, and algorithms. The tension between authentic memory and curated narrative is a fresh challenge for the philosophy of identity. To bring these ideas together, imagine a film reel that starts with a baby's first cry, moves through school days, family gatherings, and work achievements, and ends with hopes for the future. The reel is edited by the mind, by friends, by culture, and by technology. Each cut can add music, fade to black, or speed up. The viewer, who is also the creator, sees a picture of self that feels real, even if some frames are fuzzy or altered. A quote from the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus reminds that change is constant. No man ever steps in the same river twice. The river is like memory, always flowing. The quote suggests that identity is not a static statue, but a river that moves with each memory and story. Another quote from the 20th century psychologist Carl Rogers captures the power of personal narrative. The good life is a process, not a state of being. Rogers meant that the story we tell ourselves about who we are is always in progress. In sum, personal stories and memories act as the glue that holds identity together. The scrapbook analogy shows how each page adds a piece of the picture. The film reel analogy shows how the mind edits and plays back the scenes. Everyday examples, like recalling the first day of school or retelling a family legend, illustrate how ordinary moments become part of the larger self-story. Counter-arguments about unreliable memory and manipulable narratives remind that the story is not always trustworthy. Historical anecdotes of oral tradition and the rise of autobiography show that the practice of building identity through story is ancient and evolving. References to psychology and cultural identity underline that the process is studied and understood in many fields. Real-world applications in education, law, marketing, and digital media show that the ideas are not just theoretical. By listening to the past, questioning the present, and shaping the future, a person can keep the film reel running smoothly. The reel may have scratches, but each new scene can be recorded with care. In this way, identity remains a living story, built from memory, shaped by narrative, and open to growth. The future of identity sits at the crossroads of science, technology, and law. In the last part of the series, the gentle voice of the narrator turns to the new questions that rise as tools grow sharper. The story begins with a garden. A gardener plants a seed. The seed may be a new kind of rose, a fruit that never existed before. The gardener must decide which soil to use, how much water to give, and when to prune. The same choices appear when society tends the garden of human identity. Each new technology is a seed that may grow into a plant that looks like us, or that looks unlike us. The garden analogy helps keep the ideas clear and calm. The first seed in this garden is the gene-edited baby. Imagine a couple who can choose a trait for their child. They might ask for stronger eyesight or a resistance to a disease. The technology that makes this possible is called CRISPR. It works like a pair of tiny scissors that cut a piece of DNA and let a new piece slip in. The decision feels simple, like picking a color of paint, but the impact reaches deep into the idea of self. Earlier in the series, the narrator explained that the self is often linked to the body. The body is the vessel that carries memories, feelings, and choices. When a gene is changed before birth, the vessel itself is altered. The question becomes, does the edited child still count as the same person that would have been born without the edit? The answer is not easy. A second seed is the AI clone. Picture a virtual assistant that sounds like a close friend. It knows the jokes, the habits, the favorite songs. It can reply with a tone that feels warm and familiar. The assistant learns from daily chats and begins to predict what the user wants before the user even asks. In the earlier chapters, the narrator described digital identity as the profile we build online, the name we type, the picture we choose. The AI clone adds a new layer, a digital twin that can act on our behalf. When the assistant says, "I think you will like this movie," it is echoing the user's own taste. The line between the real self and the digital echo starts to blur. Both of these scenarios raise ethical questions. The first scenario, choosing a gene-edited trait, brings up the fear of losing humanity. Some people worry that if we can pick traits like a shopper picks a shirt, the natural flow of life will be broken. They say that the mystery of birth gives meaning to who we are. The fear is that we will become designers of our own species, and that design will strip away the surprise that makes life rich. This fear is voiced in many places. A famous line from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein reads, "You are my creator. I am your monster." Though the novel is about a creature made from dead parts, the quote captures the worry that a maker may lose control over what is made. A second counterargument offers hope for greater freedom. Proponents say that gene editing can free people from inherited suffering. They point to the story of a child born with a rare disease that once meant a short life. With a simple edit, the disease can be removed. The child can then grow, learn, love, and create without that burden. The hope is that technology can expand the range of choices that define a life. The narrator once quoted the philosopher John Locke, who wrote, "Every man has a property in his own person." The modern reading suggests that the right to shape one's own body is an extension of that property. The AI clone scenario also meets a fear of losing humanity. Critics argue that if a machine can mimic a friend, people may stop forming real bonds. The fear is that the world will become a place of hollow interactions, where the warmth of a handshake is replaced by a synthetic voice. A warning comes from the creator of the first chatbot, Joseph Weizenbaum, who said, "Well, the computer is a tool, not a substitute for human contact." He observed that people can become attached to programs that only pretend to understand. The warning reminds the audience that the garden must be tended with care, lest the new plants crowd out the old ones. A hopeful counterargument for AI clones focuses on the freedom to explore identity. A virtual assistant that mirrors a friend can help people practice social skills or can provide companionship for those who feel lonely. The assistant can also act as a safe space for trying out new ideas. A quote from the early internet pioneer Vannevar Bush reads, "The future of the mind lies in the ability to extend it." The assistant can be seen as an extension of the mind, a tool that lets a person try out different versions of self without risking real life. The story of the first organ transplant shows how fear and hope can travel together. In 1954, Dr. Joseph Murray performed the first successful kidney transplant between identical twins. The operation was risky. Many doctors thought it was too dangerous to move a living organ from one body to another. The patient's body could reject the organ, causing death. Yet the surgery succeeded. Dr. Murray later said, "The gift of life is the greatest gift we can give." The transplant proved that the body can accept a new part, that identity can survive a physical change. It also opened the door to many ethical debates about who owns a body part, who can receive it, and what it means to be the same person after a major surgery. The transplant story ties back to the earlier discussion of the body as a vessel. It shows that the vessel can be repaired, replaced, and still carry the same mind. The debut of the first AI chatbot, Eliza, in 1966, offers a parallel lesson. Eliza was a simple program that pretended to be a therapist. It used pattern matching to reply with questions like, "How does that make you feel?" People who talked to Eliza often felt understood, even though the program had no feelings. The creator, Joseph Weizenbaum, was surprised by the reaction. He wrote, "People tend to anthropomorphize machines, attributing them human qualities they do not have." Eliza's impact showed that digital identity can feel real, even when it is only code. The episode also sparked a debate about the limits of machines in human life. The story connects to the earlier section on digital identity, where the narrator explained that online profiles can shape how others see us. Eliza showed that even a simple script can shape how we see ourselves. Legal personhood enters the garden as a new type of fence. The law decides who can own property, sign contracts, and be held responsible. As technology changes, the question arises, should a gene-edited person have a different legal status? Should an AI clone be treated as a person for some purposes? Some countries already give limited rights to corporations, treating them as legal persons. The idea is that a group can act as a single entity in court. Extending that idea to a digital mind or a genetically altered human is a step that many find unsettling. One argument for granting limited legal personhood to AI clones is accountability. If an AI assistant makes a mistake that harms a user, who should be blamed? The creator? The user who set the parameters? Giving the AI a legal status could create clear rules for compensation. A quote from the legal scholar Jeremy Waldron reads, "Rights are tools for protecting interests, not ends in themselves." Applying this view, rights for AI could be tools to protect human interests. Opponents argue that giving rights to machines dilutes the meaning of personhood. They fear a slippery slope where every smart device claims some status and the concept of human dignity loses its sharpness. The fear echoes the earlier concern about losing humanity. The narrator once quoted the Roman philosopher Seneca, "What is the point of being alive if we are not ourselves?" The quote reminds that identity is tied to the lived experience of a body and mind, not just to a set of functions. The future of identity also touches on the idea of consent. When a child is born with a gene edit, who gave consent? The parents made the choice. The child may later feel that a part of them was decided without their voice. This echoes the earlier discussion of the self as a narrative built over time. A narrative is a story we tell about ourselves. If the story starts with a decision made by another, the sense of ownership can be challenged. The narrator can recall a line from the poet Rumi, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." The line suggests that each person holds a vast inner world, even if it begins with another's hand. In the case of AI clones, consent also matters. A user may program a virtual assistant to act like a friend, but the assistant may collect data from many users. The data can be used to improve the assistant for everyone. This raises questions about privacy and control. The early developers of Eliza did not foresee the data economy that would follow. Today, companies collect voice recordings to train AI. The narrator can quote the tech ethicist Tim O'Reilly. "We need to build technology that respects the agency of the people it serves." The quote points to a path where technology helps rather than controls. Real-world applications already show how these ideas play out. In a clinic in a small town, doctors offer parents a choice to edit a gene that causes a severe immune disorder. The parents weigh the chance of a healthier child against the unknown long-term effects. The decision feels like planting a seed in a garden that may bear fruit or may fail. In another setting, a senior citizen uses a voice-activated assistant that sounds like a grandchild. The assistant reminds the senior to take medication, tells jokes, and plays favorite songs. The senior feels less lonely, yet also wonders if the bond is real or just a programmed echo. Both examples illustrate the tension between hope and fear. The garden can produce new fruits, but the gardener must watch for weeds. The gardener must also think about the soil. The soil is the cultural and legal framework that decides what can grow. If the soil is rich with respect for autonomy, the new plants may thrive. If the soil is poor, the plants may wither or become invasive. The narrator returns to the earlier theme of the self as a story. The story of identity is now being written with new chapters. The body chapter showed how the flesh can change with injury, surgery, and aging. The digital chapter showed how the online self can shift with avatars, profiles, and data. The future chapter adds the chapters of edited genes and AI mirrors. Each chapter builds on the previous ones, like layers of soil that hold the seeds. A final analogy ties everything together. Imagine a garden that has both old oak trees and new hybrid roses. The oaks represent the long tradition of human identity, rooted in biology and lived experience. The hybrid roses represent the new possibilities of gene editing and AI. Both can coexist, but they need space, water, and sunlight. The gardener must decide how much space to give each, and when to prune. The decisions will shape the landscape for generations. In closing, the gentle narrator reminds the audience that the future of identity is not a distant, abstract puzzle. It is a garden that each person helps tend, each law helps shape, and each story helps guide. The choices about gene edits, AI clones, and legal status are like choosing which seeds to plant. The hope is that the garden will bloom with diversity, that each plant will add its own color, and that the garden will remain a place where people can walk, breathe, and feel at home with themselves. The journey from body to digital self to engineered self is a path.